Today we're going to explore the most ridiculous wars in the world. The first conflict, the Emu War. And no, this isn't some scene with a bunch of guys in Africa riding ostriches and battling it out. Instead, this story takes place in Australia, a place that's considered the international version of Weird News Central. When the Europeans first came to settle in the western part of Australia, they encountered a rather annoying problem, which was this massive flock of Australian ostriches, aka emus. Now, unlike African ostriches, see, this bunch is pretty aggressive and not afraid of humans. And they were constantly along with a bunch of other pests, invading the wheat fields and causing havoc. At first, people didn't make a huge deal out of it, because the damage caused by these emus wasn't at an alarming level yet. But then in 1932, when the global economic crisis broke out, and wheat prices in Australia were at a record low, the emu population in Western Australia was also exploding, so more and more flocks started showing up to eat the wheat. The wheat was already losing its value, and now it was being destroyed by these emus. So the farmers in Western Australia were furious. At first they tried a bunch of different methods to stop them, but nothing really worked. Finally, in October of 1932, the Australian government decided to go on the offensive. They skipped right past the usual measures for controlling wild animals and went straight to deploying the military. And just like that, a war against the emus was officially declared in the country. The Australian military joined the fight with a force of 3. Of the best marksmen from the Royal Australian Artillery, they were equipped with 2 heavy machine guns, 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and a motorized vehicle ready to head straight into the Western Australian countryside to wipe out those darn emus. But the thing is, on their first deployment, it rained heavily, so the Australian troops had to call it off. By early November of 1932, when the weather was better, they launched the operation again, and with the help of local farmers, the troops managed to ambush a small stray group of emus. I'm not sure what kind of training those guys from the Royal Artillery actually received, but by the end of the day, the final count showed they had only managed to kill exactly 10 birds. Then on November 4th, the Australian troops changed their tactics. Instead of ambushing like before, so they decided to mount guns on their vehicles and chase them down. Chasing down that flock of emus. After spotting a flock of over 1,000 drinking water at a nearby dam, they immediately moved out. This time the Australian soldiers' aim was much better, but there was one problem. Just as they were getting into it, the gun jammed. In the end, they only managed to kill about 10 emus. The rest of them scattered in an instant. The commanding officer was so furious, he tried to run the emus over with the truck, but he lost control and crashed straight into a nearby fence. And even though no one was hurt in the incident, an army that operates like this is bound to lose face, that's for sure. After that, there were a few more attempts to hunt and kill them, but the results were just as insignificant. According to the Australian soldiers' descriptions, it seemed like these emus were pretty smart. After several run-ins with humans, whenever they would move in to raid the wheat fields, they would assign one emu to stand guard for the whole flock. The second it spotted any trouble, that lookout would alert the entire mob, which would then split into smaller groups to retreat. As a result, every time the army gave chase, they ran into a lot of trouble. Finally, on November 8th, after being ridiculed all over the media, the official emu hunting squad formally withdrew from Western Australia. By that point, more than 2,500 rounds of ammunition had been fired by the Australian army, but fewer than 200 emus had been killed. Some of the artillerymen from this campaign even went on television afterward, praising the emus as these incredibly resilient creatures and all that, just to make excuses for themselves. You have to wonder if the emus were just that smart, or if these guys were just that dumb. After the army withdrew, the emus went right back to causing trouble. So the people had to report them to the government again. And so the government sent the army back in to fight again. But this time, well, superior gear, a larger army, so the number of emus killed did improve. On December 10th, the Australian army announced that the operation was complete and withdrew from Western Australia. But the real reason behind this withdrawal was that killing emus with machine guns was a complete waste of money. In total, only about 900 emus were killed, but it took a whopping 10,000 rounds of ammunition. That means it took more than 10 bullets to take down a single one. News of this war then went viral all over the world, and Australia got a lot of flack, especially in Britain, where they were fiercely condemned. The Brits argued that this was a rare endemic bird species. It was precious, and at the time, there were just so many of them. After that, the Australian government got so much criticism that they were embarrassed. So later on, when Australian farmers asked for aid again to deal with the emus, they didn't send in the army anymore. They said that the government would help the people solve the problem themselves by putting up barbed wire fences and helping install various traps for wild animals. Then the bounty for hunting the emus yourself was also increased, and people would be provided with ammunition, free of charge to hunt them. This method turned out to be far more effective. The emu menace was brought under control. Today, the emu is no longer a problem for Australian agriculture. The lesson learned here is that the Australian army lost to a bunch of emus. The Sparrow War was also a fight against birds. But this time, humanity won. A crushing victory, in fact. The only thing is, they won the battle, but lost the war. After winning, they suffered a massive loss. Then one fine day, in 1958 to be exact, it was on the 18th of March, when the chairman of China at that time launched a campaign called the Smash Sparrows Campaign. In other words, a war on sparrows. According to China's top scientists, at the time one sparrow on average ate 2.5 kilograms of grain each year, and all of China had a whopping 2.5 billion sparrows. So if all the sparrows were eliminated, every year there would be enough extra food to save 30 million people from starvation. China was on the brink of starvation back then, so this was music to their ears. And so from the countryside to the cities, from the coast to the mountains, everywhere people were competing to kill sparrows. And just like that, general command headquarters for the siege on sparrows were established in many regions, with the highest local leader acting as commander-in-chief. Students, soldiers, workers, and civil servants were given time off from school and worked to go to war with the sparrows. Children were also encouraged to participate in order to be rewarded. People used every method imaginable, from setting traps, using guns to destroy nests, to banging gongs and cymbals to chase the sparrows until they flew to the point of exhaustion and died. Unlike the Australian army, this campaign could be considered a total success. Within the first 3 days of the campaign, in Beijing and Shanghai alone, nearly 1 million sparrows were wiped out. To encourage the people to continue their efforts, the Chinese press constantly published articles praising the greatness of this campaign, accompanied by images of mountains of dead sparrows. Even artists and writers composed poems to fight the birds on the cultural front. Basically, the whole thing was completely insane. In the end, in just under a year, more than 2 billion sparrows had been eliminated across China, and the sparrows were practically driven to extinction in the country. And the result was, in 1958, grain output improved dramatically. People everywhere were celebrating, but Mother Nature wasn't too happy about it, because without the sparrows, the ecological balance was shattered, which led to a boom in the population of pest insects. And this swarm was the real nightmare for agriculture. In the years that followed, pest infestations continuously broke out, devastating crops all across China. People tried to exterminate them just like they did with the sparrows, but this time it wasn't effective. It was then that the Chinese people realized, well, they had played a stupid game and won a stupid prize. It turned out that China's brilliant genius scientists had only considered the fact that sparrows eat grain, but didn't consider the part where sparrows are the natural predators of those very pest insects. So on March 18th, 1960, China announced a complete U-turn, ordering a nationwide halt to the killing of sparrows. Across the nation, But it was too late. The sparrow population in China could no longer recover on its own. For the next 3 years, famine and crop failures occurred continuously. It's estimated that around 30 million Chinese people had their hunger successfully eliminated at that time by being reincarnated on a different server. I mean, semantically speaking, their hunger was in fact eliminated. Those Chinese officials were pretty twisted, huh? In the end, China had to plead with the Soviet Union for help, asking the country to send over sparrows as emergency aid. But even then, those Chinese officials still had to save face, hiding the whole sparrow killing in famine situation. They went so far as to continue exporting their reserve rice to other countries to make it seem like they were still having a bumper crop. So the Soviet Union, they even thought China was trying to pull some kind of trick or some crazy stunt with a bunch of sparrows. But they sent them over anyway. 250,000 sparrows by train. As soon as they arrived in China, this flock of sparrows quickly got to work. In the eyes of these birds, all those pests looked like nothing more than a giant free all-you-can-eat buffet. And this new sparrow population grew rapidly, and the pest infestation was brought under control. So China's agricultural economy was basically restored at this point, until 1976, when China decided to go big once again. But that incident is a different story, so I won't get into it just yet. The karma for the Sparrow War came in the 21st century when the Chinese people faced a new nightmare called the sunbathing sparrow. So far, we've been talking about wars against animals. Now let's get back to wars between people. This is the Kettle War. This was a war between the Holy Roman Empire and the Netherlands. Now, in case you don't know, the Holy Roman Empire was a kingdom in Europe. During the Middle Ages, it was the predecessor to Germany, Austria, Hungary, and many other European nations today. But it wasn't Roman, and it wasn't very holy either. To get a clearer picture, we need to go over the context a bit. This starts back in the year 1585. After gaining independence from Spain, the Dutch government blockaded the mouth of the Scheldt River, an area they had just captured. This made it impossible for merchant ships to reach the ports of Antwerp and Ghent, which belonged to Spain and were located deep inland. Later on, Spain ceded Antwerp, and as for the Holy Roman Empire, in the year 1714, this situation was still ongoing. This made the emperors of the empire very unhappy, but the Dutch at the time were also stubborn as heck, so they didn't want to get involved either. It wasn't until the year 1781, taking advantage of the fact that the Netherlands was busy fighting England, that Joseph II, the reigning Holy Roman Emperor at the time, sent a letter threatening the Dutch. He demanded that they reopen the river mouth. If not, he would send his army over to join the fun and smash all their windmills to pieces. The Dutch, still being stubborn, firmly refused. So Joseph II flew into a rage. He immediately sent 3 warships, flying his flag from Antwerp to Scheldt as a show of force. As soon as they arrived, the fleet was welcomed by the Dutch with a single extremely accurate cannon shot, which took the life of a water kettle. This shot didn't just take away the life of a kettle on deck, but it also completely drained the courage of the Holy Roman crew. As a result, the 3 warships of the empire surrendered to the Dutch right then and there. About a year later, the Netherlands and the Holy Roman Empire signed a treaty, with France acting as mediator. According to it, the Netherlands retained the right to blockade the river mouth, but had to pay the empire a sum in compensation, somewhere around 2 million florins. For the Netherlands, all in all, this was a strange war, because the only casualty was a kettle. The War of the Three Manavisas. This was a war in India in the year 1366 between the Hindu kingdom of Faj Ayanagar and the Bahmani Sultanate. The Bahmanis followed Islam. Hearing that, many of you might think this war revolved around the issue of religion, which has been a sore point in India for generations. But this war actually started because of a rather absurd event. Specifically, on one occasion, the Sultan of Bahmani Muhammad Shah invited a group of famous musicians from Delhi to play at his son's wedding banquet. However, after the party was over, instead of paying them as usual, this sultan wrote a note referring them to the king of Vijayanagara, Bukka Raya. Bukka, B-U-K-K-A, not Booker. And he demanded that his rival pay the debt for him. At that point in time, these two kingdoms already had ongoing disputes with each other. In fact, they had fought several major battles just a few years earlier. So this could be seen as a move by the Sultan to test Vijayanagara to see if the other side would show him any respect. So that group of musicians traveled over 400 kilometers to the capital of Vijayanagara. When they arrived, they requested an audience with Bukka Raya and presented that bizarre IOU. After reading it, King Bukka immediately summoned the artist to his palace and clarified, "I wasn't even invited to the damn party, so why the hell should I have to pay for someone else's bill?" After that, he immediately ordered his soldiers to kick the musicians' asses out of the city. So these poor guys had to trudge another 400 kilometers back to Bahmani to report back to Muhammad. I bet after traveling back and forth that much, those guys were pretty pissed off. So when they got back, they probably spiced up the story. And when Muhammad heard it, he flew into a rage, believing that the musicians, who were essentially his representatives, had been disrespected with his envoy, and King Vijayanagara had disrespected the Bahmani envoy. So you know a fight was inevitable. After that, Bahmani immediately prepared its army and marched its troops over to fight Vijayanagara. After a moment of being completely clueless about what was happening, they also geared up and went all in. The two sides then fought 3 major battles, and the final victory belonged to Bahmani. Muhammad continuously besieged the capital of Vijayanagara, Onagara, for many weeks, until Bukka Raya had to announce his surrender and promise to pay the musicians. And as soon as the money was paid, right in front of Muhammad Shah, the man immediately ordered his troops to withdraw. If he pulled out any faster, well, I got nothing. And those were the stupidest wars in history. And of course, there are still quite a few other wars like these. If you guys want me to continue, well, just comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. Goodbye and see you next time.